And we're going to see how can I do policy without actually writing, without actually using the UI. I want to do everything as code. It has to fit in my pipeline. It has to go magically inside GitHub. I should never have to log in to anything there. If it doesn't have a CLI, it doesn't count. And that's the idea around it. So to start with, we have the exact same environment that you had here. And what I did in this environment, I created a sub-environment, if you want, a new scope, if you follow Tim and Rob, that's called ns myapp equals dev, myapp dash dev, sorry. And that's going to be basically my Kubernetes environment, which is going to run inside it. And I've defined some set of policies with very crappy UIDs that you can imagine in there, but it doesn't really matter because I'm actually not going to use the UI at all. So that's what I'm building. My app is going to have some clients accessing a server over port 80, and they're going to use two databases that are there. One database is going to be in prod. One database is going to be in dev. So to put a bit of variety there, because obviously when you develop, you always follow the rules very perfectly. That situation would, of course, never happen. But let's just take that as an example. So I'm going to put this here in my policy. But first, where does this policy come from? And this policy comes from my pipeline. So I have a Jenkins, which is running, and this could be anything you want. Could be in the cloud, could be a SaaS, could be anything. I mean, we don't really have any religion with regards to that. We just chose Jenkins because we use Jenkins. That's literally the only reason. And there I have my app that's here. And you can see that I fail a lot of time because it's a pipeline. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. Sometimes it works because it's magic. And I have my whole deployment that happened. And you can see that the last step of my deployment was that I deployed policy in that environment. So my policy has been pushed in. And this policy comes from GitHub. So that's a public repo, by the way. So I mean, if you want to have a look at the policy file, by all means, go ahead in there. So I'm going to use policy-sjc15 because we're in building 15 of San Jose. Well, the physical server is over there. And I've defined my policy based on Kubernetes network constructs, i.e. network policy model in Kubernetes. What does that mean? If you have an existing policy, just bring it here. It means that you don't need to learn another policy. It means that everything that exists in those constructs you can reuse, and they will actually go automatically inside iteration. And that's actually the source of the policy that got pushed there. And you can see here my policy to DB. I can see my prod tag. I can see my dev tag. And I can see my access, here to the VIP, which I put at 10.0/8 to be able to access my VIP. So that's my policy. I put it into the environment, and well, I kind of expect it works because, right, I'm the annoying developer, and what I do is right, and what you do is basically blocking me for being able to actually run the business. So I push this policy in, and guess what? The prod database did not work. And that's because of the Australian, most likely, that just came in. And again, he reversed the planet and he just blocked dev to access to prod. Not quite sure why he would do that, but he did it. So if I refresh my page, you can see that I can access my dev, it's green. And then whenever timeout comes in, I can't access my prod DB. So great. What's my number one reaction? I'm going to escalate this up to the CEO if needed, because I need this policy to work in my environment. It's blocking on my application. And to be fair, it's a fair safeguard that's been put in there. It's like, it might be unreasonable, but it's a fair safeguard. But the reason why I'm the most frustrated is actually not because this policy is there, but because I didn't know this policy was there. And so I ran my code, I built it, it actually works, but I can't actually run my test on it because it doesn't work. Now, what would I've liked to know as a developer is, I mean, you want to fail, just fail fast. And that's really what I want to do in those environments. So why did the test pass in that environment. We should have failed it early. So the reason why this happened is actually Rob pushed his policy after I deployed the application. So I didn't know what was going on. But now, as my application is actually part of the CI/CD, I could also go back and I could rerun this build. Just make sure we're on the last one we are. And I can ask the system to go back and just re-execute this whole chain of events for me and let me know if that would work. And hopefully, at some point, we should see something happening in there. And obviously, God, I was happy I cracked this beer for the gods of demo. So obviously, the policy didn't work, but rather than having my whole build process go through, because that's like probably 5 minutes, and you say, yeah, 5 minutes, that's not that big of a deal. 5 minutes is an eternity for me, so I don't want to wait 5 minutes again. I failed the build in 20 seconds. And I failed the build, and I explained that actually there's a policy conflict. You requested this policy here, which actually is trying to match the production environment. But this policy can't work because there are two policies that are defined in this environment to actually block this from working for me. So that's feedback that's given there. And at this point, I have two options as a developer. I mean, option one, I can say, screw you, I want my exception. Always an option. And you can go and escalate based on this data. We know exactly why the policy didn't work. So I have all the data I need to go forward. Or I can just say, you know what? I actually want to get moving faster. So maybe I can just push another policy there that actually works with the rules of that environment. Maybe I don't need prod. So now I can go and I can actually write my policy here. And I'm going to say, you know what, prod, maybe not a good idea. I'm not even sure. Probably I was not even using the prod one, but it's just like, you know what, if you're asking, it's like the Godot rule. If you're asking for a port opening, make sure you ask the widest possible port opening, just in case. So I might not need it, so I can remove it. Now I have dev talking to my app. And my app is actually defined in Kubernetes. See it here. It's here, running in that environment for me. And maybe I'll do something different as well here. I did 10.0/8. I really don't need 10.0/8 for access to the service. A single IP is actually better for me. So I'm just going to uncomment those lines in there. So what is my new policy? My new policy is basically here, 202 actually. Let me push it and then I'll explain, because Tim and Rob spoke a bit too much. So XFD4, I believe. So let's push that. I'm pushing that to the great GitHub. And because our great friends of Cisco IT will not allow us to actually allow inbound communication to the lab from internet, go figure why, I have to manually scan the repo. So let me just scan the repo, and then we can talk about what's going on. There we go. So now policy is running. So what did I do in this environment? I created this single IP address, which is going to access an application, which is defined by a tag in there. So if you remember, we said that AWS, you can actually rely on AWS tags to pull the data out. Well, if tags exist in Kubernetes, I can actually pull them in Kubernetes. So if I do kubectl describe pod not pod, yeah, I describe this pod. I can actually automatically ingest the data which is coming here from the app name, which is going to be here, demo-policy-pipeline. So again, I'm the developer. I still don't need to log into the platform. Everything I'm doing here is completely done remotely from my development environment there. So I use that like there's already a good news. If you remember before, we failed the policy because it was actually conflicting. Now the LinkedIn has actually gone through. So it means that, hey, you know what? The policy I'm actually implementing right now is actually the right policy. In there, it's actually approvable in the world of Tim and Rob in there. So I can go and I can push this to production. Now I'm going to be able to run through all my build process and so on. That takes roughly 3 minutes to go through the whole thing. Again, not very patient in that. So this is what's actually running in the back end on that. And so all my policy model is going to get updated. Everything will get changed automatically for me. And we should see, once everything is finished, we should move from the 3 policies here. We should be moving down to 2 policies, as I've removed one of the endpoints at this point. So we're finally at the last stage. Again, I really hope this beer was worth the demo gods. Very lucky in terms of performance today, I have to give you that. Usually that's a few seconds. Anyhow, while this is finishing, because it will hopefully finish at some point, I'm waiting for this to become green and actually, you know, add some hope, but no. So, okay, while this is finishing, let me just take quickly, I'll just take the whiteboard for 1 second and I'll show you what we were actually doing in this environment and why it actually makes sense. Okay, so let's move to the whiteboard. So what you should be seeing here, I have my little developer, which is running here. And what he's doing is that he's actually putting his code file here, and let's say that he's a purist, so it's going to be C++ in there. He's actually putting that inside his GitHub repo. And that already has a pretty interesting impact for him. The first thing, depending on how you're developing your applications, there's a pretty high chance your policy ends up by moving in the life of the system. And you might have a policy that is tied to a specific release of code. And so what you're going to see here is that as the developer is checking in this policy alongside with his code, if you need to revert the policy, you can revert the code and the policy that goes together. You don't really need to worry about that. Then as I go to GitHub, I'm going to have here my Jenkins running. Obviously, I write terribly, and actually the arrow in this case would be more like that. And we're going to pull this code down from the whole application there. And then Jenkins will go through lint, and then it's going to go through build. I mean, and all those steps are really up to you how you're going to put them in. And finally, it's going to go to deploy with policy. Now, the problem with this model is obviously, you saw before, as the security admin in those cases, which was Tim and Rob, actually set up this policy in the environment, well, we end up in a kind of a weird situation in there because they set a policy which was blocking me from accessing that. And if you remember what we were discussing, Tim showed you how you could build zones. And I kind of quickly explained that we could actually send policy to third-party devices, which means you could actually be setting a policy which is going through a firewall after the Kubernetes cluster and accessing S3 or whatever, something outside of your environment. And while the policy may be set very correctly inside the host, it may actually not be set correctly at all with regards to where the application is actually going to reach out to. So we're in this kind of weird situation where, yeah, me as a developer, I did everything super fast, super quick, everything is online and so on, but actually the middle part is still blocking me from doing anything else. And that's where we actually come and we take the network security or network admin, depending what is running there. And what we do is that while we lint and build and deploy, we actually create a copy of that we store inside iteration. And that's where your administrator is going to have access to the platform, which means that the day you have to troubleshoot this thing, because in the end, when we build something, 99% of the time, it's just to make sure we can troubleshoot it later. when you're going to troubleshoot this thing at a later stage, well, me as a network security guy, or the network admin, I can run situation, I can see what my developers are pushing as policy. Developers continue doing their thing, they don't care. And so as we were talking, for example, earlier about AppD and the integration and so on, that's why we're saying it may make sense or it may not make sense to necessarily go for our full integration if we can provide this data at one place so people can actually go and look at it from a single point of view. The second benefit of that is obviously the guardrails. Like whatever I do in my environment as a developer, I can't come and breach what this guy has put in for me. It's like this rule is the overlord, if you want, of the policy. You cannot go against it. And that being much simpler at the end to go and control in the environment, because now I have my global policies. So in short, your CISO is not going to jail that easily. Developers can go and expose port 80 over internet and put all your PII data or PCI data in one place. So you get a kind of nice, neat, and simple deployment in there. Does that make sense for everyone? I'll take that for a yes. Either a yes or either you absolutely hate it. So at this point, as this went through, in the environment and the policies actually getting pushed, we need to be able to enforce it in multiple places. I mean, this policy could be enforced on an F5 device and an ingress controller, for example. And we kind of need to be able to provide this data there because, like we were saying earlier, AWS is a whole mess when it comes to IP addresses and things like that. Well, guess what? Kubernetes is about 100 times worse than that. So we need to be able to capture this information. We also need to be able to, what Rob was mentioning earlier, to gather extra data on the form of tags coming from campus environment. What if I can actually control based on the authentication or the posture of a device as the access inside the application? And the only way I can do that is if I am capable of sitting at this kind of edge point here, which would be F5 in this case, across the environment. So let's go back to our environment. So a few things here. Notice here I'm running my commit. Anyway, I'm running my commit B84 in here. Policy here is 781B, but if I switch back my application, I come back here. B84, which means that as a developer, I can pretty easily come back and track what's going on. My policy moved from 3 to 2 entries in that environment, which means that now I do have a better kind of positioning across this, where I can understand what's going on there. And again, this policy is again enforced at multiple places. One of the places being the container host. So when we're talking about agent deployment, we didn't go in that level of detail, but in the case of containers, it's not one agent per container. So we just put the agent at the host level on the platform. Makes life simple. You can enforce across all the containers in there. So there's a bit less friction on that side. That's not zero, but it's a bit better. And now I have my policy set up for me in my environment. So first thing, it's all red, which is kind of expected because I'm pretty sure I broke the whole thing. And you can see, if you have very good eyes, you can see right at the bottom, there's the connecting showing up because my application seems to be blocked from accessing the platform, which is somewhat expected because I did restrain it to a single workload running here. And that's not my IP address. So I can go here and now on this guy, I'm actually 202 in this environment. So now I can have a better view of my platform. Normally I should have a view of my platform. So let's go and have a look. So I'm on F5. So now I'm completely outside of the world of Cisco. And I've done a few things here. It's the F5 ingress controller. So this is basically just, let me actually zoom in a bit. I think that might be a little bit aggressive for the eyes. And there, like that. So in there, with this configuration, the ingress is basically just automatically going to assign 91, which is going to be my VIP IP, is going to assign it to a pool here, which is going to be my app front end, and my app front end is running with a single IP, which is 207 now in this environment. So now if I go here, hopefully, sorry, if I click on the right one, might work a bit better. 207. Again, as a developer, I've not made any modification anywhere here. All this has been carried on for me automatically in the environment. So now I have my thing set up. Now I can go and check my policies. So I can go to my security, firewall, and list. I can see my policy here. And you can see that here, I have this policy has been created for me, but not on the host directly. This time it's actually done on the firewall. So here, normally if I refresh, I have my environment that actually works. I have my policy set up. And I actually was able to set a layer of policy with an environment I don't control. I can't modify Rob's policy in this environment. I have to go through this process here. And I'm actually going and pushing this policy out to the different devices. Now, if you were to have more devices in the environment, if you were working with some of our partners like AlgoSec or Tufin, or if you had like other bare metals, other agents across the environment, you could actually go and enforce this policy there as well. So again, container person pushes his policy inside his code. His code automatically renders the policy inside the different elements that kind of make sense in there without ever having to go and look. But me, as an administrator, or actually Tim and Rob as administrator, can still go and check all the details on the platform, all the tags which are here. So I can see that, hey, this guy is running on 2.4. So let's go and see what is the policy. Think about your typical troubleshooting workflow. Like, okay, I need to go and see the host. And you probably don't have access to the container host because people don't want you to touch it. Here are all my policies that show up inside the platform. I can see which policies actually having hits on them, so I can track that super easily across the environment. So that's how we kind of bridge the gap between different worlds, different philosophies in terms of approach, where we actually help people, allow them to be able to move on inside the environment in there. Any questions? That's the end of the demo. And I went a bit fast on that. So that makes sense. Critiques, comments, feedback.
Remi, I got a quick question for you. In regards to fast client changes, like the new Wi-Fi standards with fast MAC rotations, fast IP rotations too, as a result for a bunch of that, or IPv4 and IPv6 correlation to understand it's the same host that may be doing different requests across different protocols. Are you guys correlating all of that in titration so that the same policy sets apply regardless of, or those end up being separate, stratified different policy sets that get applied? How does that work?
That's a very valid point. Actually, when I was mentioning identity, that was exactly that use case I had in mind in there. So what happens when we have agents in titration, we track all their IPs. I think there's a few clusters somewhere in here that has a whole bunch of IPs. So you can see each one has a set of different IPs, v6, v4, and others in there. So when we actually render a policy, we render a policy for a host in that environment. If you were to think client access, like people coming in and let's say iPhone and randomization of Macs and all that stuff there, if you're able to track things like 802.1x there, so ICE, for example, you can integrate ICE with titration, and then the MAC address or the IP address doesn't matter anymore because we're just going to ask ICE to tell us, hey, who's this guy coming in? And he's going to say, oh, IPX is currently assigned to user Y, and maybe in 10 seconds, this IP will going to be assigned to another user. And so the policy automatically refreshes and reflects all those changes as they happen. Is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, that was what I was curious about, how the groupings work. So thanks.
Sure.
Remi, I've got a question. It's an operational question as far as In some of the screens you were showing, it had a breakout of a port and what the protocol was. Is it pulling that protocol from a list, or can you configure that, or configure it on because you could have sometimes the same port being used for multiple different applications, and I don't want 8080 to always think it's whatever the first 8080 to show up to the party was.
Good point. So you can't imagine the amount of debate there was on this feature inside our team. Like, it lasted really, really long time. So that's just basically based on the YAML ports assignments, and it's just meant to be an indication to the human which is behind the platform. We actually completely ignore that when it comes to the policy generation and everything that Tim has showed you. The actual name doesn't matter, because we're going to look at the process. And we can actually see that the process that's actually holding this connection is, maybe it's Java Tomcat over port 8080 or Nginx over port AT&T, and they may be different on different servers for whatever we know. And if we actually, as we are capable of tracking the process, when we do those groupings, we actually take that into account and we say, okay, well, yes, it's the same port, yes, it's the same client, but no, it's actually different processes behind it. So probably not the same app. Might be, but probably not.
So it's more tied to like a GUID than it is just a static host table, basically, however the service list used to be, just a text file.
Exactly. That one, yeah, that's purely GUI based, nothing else.
So Remi, a quick question. Since saturation sees the processes too, can I also secure localhost traffic and even better some pipes within the same host?
So localhost and pipes, not today. The reason is, honestly, we kind of tested that idea with a few people, and people were like, you guys are completely nuts or what? Literally was the answer we got. So pipes for sure. I mean, that one, we've seen the most interesting comments coming out of people when we started talking about pipes. And I'm mindful of Tom's mature audience comments, so I don't want to put the exact comments we got. But yeah, on localhost, not really. We didn't see a need for that today. In there, the reason we didn't invest too much time is, as you move to microservices, everything I showed you today that was showing in containers can actually act individually per container. So the question is, will that still make sense in 10 years? And are the application owners securing IPC on a Windows server in there? Do they really want to go that deep, or are they anyway going to migrate it somewhere else, like, for example, banks?
Yeah, I still see applications of 20 years old in the production. So I'm a bit more conservative.
Oh yeah, we see these ones, unfortunately, very often. We also see lift and shift of applications like that to containers, which makes life interesting in there. But we see when they do that, usually it's more like, you know what, you just put a firewall in front of the box and like we never ever touch it. That's usually the kind of feedback we got. I don't know if that's different what you heard.
No, reasonably the same. And then using tetration to actually get the traffic analytics in to do the proper policy in the firewall.
Okay, it makes total sense.
I have a question, Remi.
Sure.
In case of your pipeline are hosted in SaaS solution like Azure DevOps or Jira, and there's already have policies, which policies is the primary ones yours or the SaaS solutions?
So when we generate the policies, we would always recommend, there's only one chef in the kitchen, right? Otherwise the food's going to be terrible. So that's kind of the approach we have on that. So we think whoever drives policy, there should be only one kind of thing in there. That's why we chose the network policy format of Kubernetes in here, because we're like, if we can take what exists today and what everyone is moving towards, make kind of life easier for people to actually transition to a single environment. So we would take the policies we would ingest all the policies that exist and then re-render them for another system, whether that be an hosted kube or that could be an instances running in Azure, or it could be anything running on that.
So you won't manage the policies about the code patterns or something like that? You can't have policies relating to the code patterns?
No, we don't want to look at code by itself today. I mean, things may change, but right now we're not looking at the actual code behavior. In there, we look at things like dependencies and vulnerabilities that apply to a workload as a whole. And there you can derive policy based on that. But we don't necessarily look inside the code. The reason for that is it's pretty, if not near impossible, to actually derive from the code what's actually happening, because you may be hitting a load balancer, for example. How do I know who that is? Might be a GSLB. So those are the reasons why we kind of stay away from code at the moment.
Yes, but we all know that some security leaks are written in the code.
Correct, and that's absolutely right. Now the thing is that if I prevent lateral movement and if I restrict all the communications in the environment, and I mean there's quite a bit of other features we didn't even touch base on, for example, data leaks prevention and stuff like that in there. If you add on to those, do you need to have it in the code? I think it's available. I mean, I'd love to discuss that more, by the way. That's a topic which I cherish very much on that environment in there. So in short, we're not opposed and not against it. I think it kind of makes sense, but we don't really have it today.
Okay, so as a developer, are the information that if his code doesn't run, is that because of your policies blockage or because something wrong in the code? Does it have the information with your platform?
We won't tell them that, hey, you screwed up your code, but we will tell them, hey, we've enforced exactly the policy that you've asked us to enforce. And if the linter went through, we guarantee you that the policy is actually in place in the environment. So you need to worry about it. Now, which means that you're kind of removing one variable there by saying everything has been plumbed up correctly. We checked it, it works. Now, if there's something still doesn't work, there's a pretty high chance it's in your code.